A lot of people struggle with the idea of loving themselves. And I know that for some people, it doesn't just feel difficult, it can feel impossible. And I think part of the reason for that is that there's a lot that we misunderstand about love. We tend to confuse love with desire, attachment, infatuation, or affection. Or perhaps we were taught that love is conditional, that it's something you have to earn, that in order to receive love, you have to behave in a certain way. And if you behave otherwise, love is withheld. And then there are those who perhaps were not shown any love at all. And when you grow up without being shown a steady, healthy, reliable kind of love, it's very easy to believe that you're not worthy of love. And if any of that has been your experience, I can understand how the idea of loving yourself might feel unrealistic. But let's talk about love for just a moment. Let's talk about what love is, and more importantly, what it isn't. Love is not desire. Desire is wanting something from someone, wanting someone to make you feel good, to feel whole, to feel worthy. Whereas love is simply concerned with the well-being of others. It's not about needing anything from anyone. In fact, genuine love is freely given without requiring anything in return. And the other thing that we often misunderstand about love is that we tend to think of love as a certain kind of feeling. But love isn't a feeling. It's really more a way of being and relating. It often shows up as patience, gentleness, kindness, and compassion. And so when we're talking about loving ourselves, we're really talking about a way of relating to ourselves. We're talking about how we treat ourselves, how we speak to ourselves, how we show up for ourselves in times of need. We're talking about being there for ourselves with patience, forgiveness, understanding, and compassion, especially when things are difficult. And one of the characteristics of love is acceptance. So even if the idea of loving yourself feels strange or unrealistic, you don't have to try to love yourself. Instead, focus on accepting yourself. And I already know that some of you might be thinking, how can I accept myself when I have so many flaws, when I've made so many mistakes, when I've done things that seem unforgivable or things that I'm ashamed of? But this is what you need to understand about acceptance. Acceptance doesn't require perfection, nor is it a reward for good behavior. Acceptance simply means acknowledging where you are at this moment without judgment or condemnation. And that doesn't require liking everything about yourself. It doesn't mean approving of all your habits or behaviors or choices, but rather it's a recognition that your habits and behaviors, as well as your mistakes and even your personality traits, are not really who you are. All of those things are secondary. All of those things can be changed. And anything about you that can be changed is not you. And anything that isn't you doesn't define you. In other words, you don't need to condemn yourself. Now, we can certainly work toward making positive changes in our lives. We can work toward correcting mistakes, changing our habits and behaviors, or making other improvements. But that's not what we're talking about right now. Right now, we're simply talking about acceptance. And acceptance means allowing yourself to just be where you are without having to fix or improve anything for the moment. So let's explore some ways that we can actually practice this in our lives. And a good place to start is just to pay attention to the way that you respond to yourself in stressful situations, when things go wrong, when you make a mistake, when you fail at something, when your plans don't work out the way that you had hoped, or when you're just having one of those days. Do you get angry at yourself? Are you overly critical? Do you beat yourself up with your words? Notice the kinds of things that you say to yourself. Most of us have an inner critic that reacts in these moments, and the things that it says can be pretty harsh sometimes. So the first step can simply be noticing that voice, noticing what it's saying, and then asking yourself, is this helpful? Does beating myself up make this situation easier? Does it make me strive to do better? Or does it just drain me of all my energy and motivation and make me feel like giving up? And then ask yourself if there's a better way that you could respond instead. Perhaps the way that you might respond if someone you cared about was in the same situation. How would you speak to them? Would you speak angrily? Would you shame them? Would you tell them that they're a failure or that they're worthless? Or would you be gentle and patient, understanding and supportive? The practice here is to change the way you speak to yourself, to soften your tone, and to shift to a more supportive way of relating to yourself, a way of building yourself up instead of always putting yourself down. And we're calling it a practice for a reason, because it's going to take a bit of attention and repetition to get into the habit. So if it's hard at first or you forget sometimes, that's okay. Don't be hard on yourself. Another thing that you can do is to take time to acknowledge your positive qualities. And we all have them. But the problem is that we're usually so hung up on our flaws and imperfections that we overlook them. We might even dismiss them at times. So part of the process is learning to shift your attention, not to pretend that your flaws don't exist, but to turn your attention to what is good in you, to acknowledge those positive aspects, to acknowledge your virtues, to acknowledge what you contribute, what you offer, what you bring to the world, even to acknowledge latent qualities, that is, things which we possess even though we may not express them. Because maybe one of the reasons we don't express certain aspects of ourselves is because we don't fully acknowledge and appreciate them. And it can be helpful to spend a little time reflecting on what those qualities might be. You can even write them down and make a list and hang it someplace to remind yourself. And those qualities don't need to be anything extraordinary. They can be things like kindness, empathy, and compassion, honesty or loyalty. It could be that you're a really good listener or that you have a great sense of humor. It could be your creativity, your curiosity, or your unique way of seeing things. And I bet if you spent some time thinking about it, you could come up with a lot of things. And it's important to remember that your positive qualities are no less valuable than anyone else's. So if you admire the kindness in others, for example, then recognize that your kindness has the same value. Whatever qualities that you share with others, that you appreciate in others, appreciate them in yourself as well. So this is the secret to loving yourself. It starts with acceptance and appreciation. And if you practice these with patience and compassion, over time, love begins to grow.